Hey, guys.
All right, welcome to Den of Geek. It's Michael R. and Dave Vitagliano with you here. We are talking about the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 7 premiere, the final season. And I feel like we're pretty qualified to talk about this, Dave. You and I have been podcasting about Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Since Season 2 at thesandboxpodcast.com. And I review Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and will be reviewing Season 7 weekly on Den of Geek. So catch those reviews as the season progresses. And you write about quite a few shows as well for Den of Geek, right?
Yeah, the two that are in play, which hopefully will return in the fall, though these days with the coronavirus, you never know when shows are going to return. But Van Helsing for its final season and Vikings on History Channel for its final season as well. So I'm really excited. I love both of those shows.
And we love Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. as well, of course. And, reviewing is our game. So we're going to do a quick analysis of the premiere episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 7. And we're just going to break this down by, character and the evolution that we see from the previous season and where we think it's going to be headed. We obviously have a time travel element this season in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and this show is no stranger to that. But we love time travel shows, have for quite some time. And we've actually talked to a couple people for the show on our Sci-Fi Fidelity podcast, which is no longer running, but we did talk to the showrunners last season, and we also interviewed Clark Gregg. And I hope we get to do something like that again this season, maybe not for the podcast, but at least for the site. And, Clark Gregg in particular has a lot of evolution in this episode, Dave.
Yes, he does. And it is episode 701 titled The New Deal. And right away, I think we both love the 1930s landscape. And certainly at the end of last season, we had the shot of the Empire State Building to try to give us some idea of what time period we're in. And we were pretty accurate. We know we're in 1931 now. As we talk about this premiere episode for S.H.I.E.L.D.'s final season, which will be 13 episodes. So in terms of basic story arcs, we know we've got the Chronicoms as the basic antagonist at this point. They want to take over Earth. They've set in motion this elaborate plan to remove S.H.I.E.L.D. from the equation, but it doesn't quite turn out the way we think it's going to.
No, in fact, I find myself wondering, and we're on opposite ends of the spectrum here. I'm thinking, they're going to try different things in this time period. You're actually thinking that they might not stick to the 1930s and that we might see several different time periods in this season.
Yeah, and I think that would be just awesome. I'm guessing maybe we'll be in the 30s for 3 or 4 episodes at most, but we'll see. Gotta say, I do love Daisy's purple hair better than her 1930s style, but, I can get used to it either way. Also, though, in play is the fact that the brains of Fitz and Simmons have been scanned. And, when we were talking before we started recording, I forgot that they had Fury's toolbox, but you said that was part of last season?
Yeah, season 6, it got a very brief mention at the end that was one of the things that they were able to acquire. And so they know not only the history that Earth has been through based on their anthropological studies, but also some of the secrets that S.H.I.E.L.D. has. So right. It'll be interesting to see what gets revealed in the course of the season, since it is the final season.
Right. And as you said, I think a logical way to look at this episode is through the characters, and who better to start with than Clark Gregg and LMD Coulson. And, the whole LMD concept as a plot device, it's always there in the background if the S.H.I.E.L.D. writers need it. And some way it doesn't feel like a cheat.
Yeah, because it definitely does feel dangerous whenever they introduce the whole body snatching idea. I remember we talked about Motherland Fort Salem on the Sci-Fi Fidelity podcast, and that was one of my worries for that show. But LMDs have been a speculation since season 1 of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. because people were wondering, how did Coulson survive from the movies? And an LMD was one possibility, that maybe he was a hidden LMD the whole time. But they held that in their pocket until here in season 7.
Right. And it's a perfectly acceptable way to bring characters back that fans thought they perhaps had lost. And we'll talk about a couple of those in the course of this discussion. But we all love the new and improved Coulson. He's lost his bionic arm, but at this point, that doesn't seem to be a big deal. And, not that the original didn't have a sense of humor, because of course he did, but he's got some zingers in this episode. My favorite is, well, when FDR gets here, it'll be a whole new deal. And of course,
joke.
Yeah, if you know your history, and obviously for us, it adds a little additional meaning because this video
thing
cast is a new deal for us as well. And Coulson gets to shake hands with FDR, which is also interesting because he's still coming to grips with the fact that, I've been brought back again, and it's not something to be taken lightly. He seems to be really rolling with it pretty comfortably at this point, but you never know.
Yeah, and I like that they've given him an evolution to go through. He starts out very much against the idea of having been brought back, as Mack suspected. And Daisy was kind of very quick on that button, even though she knew that this was going to be a problem for him. But by the end of the episode, Coulson seems to be on board, maybe even sees some of the superhero aspects of his very strong new body. And also just the fact that he has nothing to lose. You know that one scene in the bar where he realizes, wait, I'm already dead. I can do whatever I want. And he takes risks that I think Mack wouldn't have otherwise done. He's like, Mack's like, well, I'm still, I'm still alive, but it actually gets them where they need to be. And so this Coulson, although much more similar to the Coulson we knew than Sarge was last season, there are going to be some changes to his personality, I think.
Right. And you mentioned Sarge, and I think most of us feel a lot more comfortable with the Coulson that we knew. Yeah. And not that we didn't love Sarge, because it was just such a cool, almost alternate version of Coulson's character, but it really wasn't Coulson. But, you mentioned Daisy and hitting the button at the end of last season to bring him back. And, she's really blunt about letting him know what she did. And I love the fact that she just doesn't leave that out there hanging. Their relationship has always been one that really stands kind of at the center of this team that he's put together and that Mack now is in charge of.
Yeah, she just kind of lays it out there and doesn't feed it to him slowly. She just says, we brought you back and you're an LMD. And then he has to adjust to 2 years worth of memories all at once because of course, his brain scan is a couple seasons out of date. But Daisy does come back and apologize. And I think that's important to show that, listen, I had to deal with an entire year of this fake Coulson in the form of Sarge. Now that I have a chance to get at least a semblance of my old father figure back, I'm going to take it. Even though Mack, of course, objects at first and shuts him down again.
Right.
So Daisy is definitely a character that's going to have a couple different levels to deal with. Really, in this episode, we mostly saw her in her Quake persona, but she's going to have to deal with some of the same things that Mack has to deal with in terms of the societal changes that result from going back in time to a time when people weren't quite as enlightened about women or different races and cultures. So I do like that when she shows up and Coulson kind of pretends to be part of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. One of the cops says, "What's a girl like you trying to be a Mountie? Can't you find a husband?" And of course, she gives him one right back and is able to hold her own. But we have an interesting element there because Daisy has had a number of relationships over the seasons, but it hasn't been really core for her character. And I think the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. writers have made an important decision there to have Daisy standing on her own, even though others around her are always getting paired off.
Right. And of course, we've got Deke on the periphery who has a really big crush on Daisy, but it's clearly not reciprocal, at least at this point. We've got 12 episodes to go. Who knows? But, you mentioned Mack having to adjust to life in the 1930s as an African-American man, but his first decision as boss on this operation is, of course, to tell Daisy that the purple hair is not going to fly. You need to do something else with that. And of course, she does. He looks great in a suit. I think he is the most imposing character on a number of levels. Yes, physical size, but there's just something about the way he carries himself, even in the face of, this racism that he knows he's going to face at some point. And, you know, it is New York City. The jazz age is getting underway. He certainly could be perceived by those that don't know him as a jazz musician on his way to a club to play a gig. And there's a certain amount of cachet that would carry. But
especially when he gets to Agent Koenig's place. Well, not Agent Koenig, but yeah, to the speakeasies, he has a little bit more sway. But yeah, he's relegated to a bartender at the political function. And it's going to be interesting to see what the writers do with that, because they played it really well with Mack kind of subtly, not completely ignoring the situation and the problem, but also not going over the top. He's just kind of grumbling under his breath and, you know, dealing it with the best way he can in a very strong way and assertive way. And I appreciate the way that they handled that, both with Daisy and with Mack.
Right. Do you think the fact that we know, despite all of this, he is the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. and he understands that he's going to do what's best for the op. And if that means posing as a bartender, so be it. Doesn't negate anything else about me.
Right. And hopefully he'll get his own. If you're correct and we get to see other time periods, maybe that will change. But for the time being, yeah, he's holding his own quite well. And I can't wait to see more director personality of him, because Mack is never better than when he's in charge, to be honest.
I mean, is it bad that I want to see Daisy in the hippie era of the 60s and 70s?
Well, no. It is a little weird seeing her fight in a dress and heels.
Yes.
And even like a nice formal hat on. But she does get that lead pipe in there. So,
yes, she does. But what about Simmons? What's the deal with her?
Well, Simmons is definitely different for me this season, and not necessarily in a good way, but I understand why they made the decision. And what I mean by that is that all of her decisions, all of her actions, all of her responses to the other characters seem to be permeated with a sadness. And I'm guessing that this has a lot to do with her separation from Fitz yet again. I don't know. Do you feel like this separation is just one too many after several seasons where this has happened?
Yeah, I do. And of course, we know that there were pragmatic reasons for at least one of these separations that they faced earlier, because Ian DeCasticker was working on a film outside of the Marvel universe. So, you know, keeping that in mind, it's a little difficult for me to accept, but we can go back to the brain scan thing, and it makes perfect logical sense to stay apart so that, you know, they keep the Earth safer.
Yeah, and that brings up the point that in previous seasons when they were separated, it was not by their choice. But this time they've chosen to be apart for strategic reasons, and that tempers it a bit. But this sadness that Gemma is feeling, I think, does actually inform her actions, such as when they capture the Chronicom from the scene of the fight that Quake had with him. But she wants to know what their plans are, and she really scrambles that Chronicom's brain in a very torturous way that I think those around her are a little bit questioning of, Yo-Yo in particular. But she does it, and I think that's a reflection on her new look, because we don't know what's happened to Gemma during the months, years that it took for her to revamp the entire Zephyr 1 and make it into a time machine. And, you know, for the other characters, it was like no time lost at all. But for her and Fitz, presumably, if we get to see him later down the road, a lot of time has passed, and it wasn't all happy-go-lucky fun times. So Gemma, interesting character. I hope she gets her happiness by the end of the season, because it's also the end of the series.
Well, yeah, and to have watched her development through the course of the years, where she starts out as this nerdy scientist that's then thrown into the field, and now she's a relative badass, and we've seen her, you know, handle herself well in the field. And as you said tonight, no compunction about jamming that spike in the back of the Chronicom's head to get what she needs. But I mentioned Deke earlier, played by Jeff Ward, and he's just such a fun character. But in this episode, anytime we've got time travel, and certainly there's always these theories about what's the time travel rule set in the Marvel Universe, and is it the same in the TV show? And I'm not sure any of us can give a definitive answer that way. But Daisy is concerned about the butterfly effect of their appearance in the 1930s, and Deke is like, no, it's the time stream idea that, we're like sticks in a stream that, if there's just a few of us, the water will get where it needs to go. Throw too many sticks and a dam forms, then we've got problems. And I love that idea of time travel.
Yeah, it works really well in this case because they can make small changes and time will self-correct, will self-heal. And I like that concept because it allows them a little bit of leeway. But then because of that, and because it's coming from Deke, it's interesting that Mack says, well, you're not one to really speak to ripples versus waves because you've, of course, stolen S.H.I.E.L.D. intellectual property
right.
and done some changes yourself, having been from a farther future. And now he's going to have to follow his own advice. So Mack is actually holding Deke to that and saying ripples, not waves, as his new mantra.
You should be able to splash around a little bit and we're all good.
Okay, I know where this is going. Agent Shaw, you will not be filing any patents. Was that understood?
I will tread ever so lightly, Director.
First time in the big city.
Ripples, not waves.
But the other thing with the time travel aspect is that whole idea of the great man theory that, if a great man goes back in time, that's one thing. But if people go back and mess with a great man's world, then that can have monumental impact as well. And we are dealing with FDR at this point. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
And I think that was a good red herring to play. FDR versus Freddy. They have very similar sounds. And the Chronicoms know what they're doing. And we should go on to the Chronicoms because not all Chronicoms are created equal. I think the actor playing Enoch does a great job of this robotic projection that he portrays. And the cops that they have introduced here are doing a great job as well. In fact, one of the Chronicoms says to the other, remember to smile. You're trying to pass as human. So when he goes to the scene of this crime, which they perpetrated, they said, if you wish to live, they say to other investigators, do not come in. There may be screaming. And then he smiles as directed, but it comes across as extremely creepy. So I think they did a great job in this first episode of introducing us to some new Chronicoms. They know exactly what thread to pull. And so this Freddy aspect of things might just be the first thread that they pull on of many. And because they've got a sense of the entire time stream themselves. And you talk about ripples versus waves. If you do the right ripple, it can become a tidal wave on the other end. And I think that's what's interesting about what the Chronicoms are up to.
Right. Now, we mentioned at the beginning of the discussion the ability to use the LMD device to bring characters back. I think if you ask fans of the show, well, who would you like to return to the show? And there are some people that would say Grant Ward for a number of reasons. But I think most people would say, give me a Koenig, any Koenig. And we get one. Ernest Hazard Koenig, Patton Oswalt is back. And I don't think there's a fan out there that is disappointed in his first appearance in season 7.
And is this a precursor to the Agent Koenigs? Because what I find interesting about his appearance is that it results from the robotic memory of Coulson looking at that bottle and seeing that the symbol of the swordfish is the password to get into a speakeasy that one day becomes an SSR safe house. Well, how does Koenig, a bootlegger, become a safe house? His bar becomes a safe house. How does that happen? How does that then lead to the creation of the Agent Koenigs? If they were created versus born, I don't know. But I love that they're actually hinting at the fact that a long-held mystery of the nature of the Koenigs might actually get an answer here in season 7.
Right. I mean, has this Koenig traveled back in time, or is he the prototype, perhaps?
Right. I think he's the human prototype of the later Koenigs, but we'll see.
Yeah. And of course, the fact that he's supplying liquor for this political party featuring FDR leads us to assume still that FDR is the target that the Chronicoms are after. And of course, that doesn't play out because, we meet Freddie Mack, and who I guess is Gideon Malick's grandfather.
Right. The main villain of, I can't remember if it was season 3 or season 4. I think it was 4. And Gideon Malick was basically a really early member of Hydra that even survived a lot of the purges later on. So the fact that here we're seeing the introduction of the Malick family into what will become Hydra, I think that was a brilliant reveal we never could have predicted. Freddy was just a background character in Koenig's bar, and that was it. So a really great new character that I think we'll be seeing a lot of.
Right, and that classic time travel reveal that to save Earth, we've got to protect Hydra.
Right.
Because with no Hydra, we got no S.H.I.E.L.D. So.
Right, exactly. So that was a very innovative way. First attempt for the Chronicoms to get rid of S.H.I.E.L.D. is by taking away their reason for existing in the first place.
Right. Now, we see the woman in red, and we see the green vials that Freddy's tasked to deliver. And all we know about the green liquid is it's the future. That's all you're going to give us at this point, I guess.
Right. And so whether that woman in red is an important figure that we'll learn more about later, or whether this plot is just the first of many, or if it's going to be the main, core part of the formation of Hydra, because, we're many years away from World War II and Red Skull. So who knows what's going on this far back in the history of Hydra and SSR. Perhaps SSR being the precursor to S.H.I.E.L.D. also has, Hydra also has a precursor.
Right. Oh, there are just so many variables here that we think we know how the world is going to turn out. As you said, right. We're, still 10 years away from World War II and Red Skull, but is the appearance of the team going to alter that in any way?
Right. So I think that the ripples we see may not even be the ones that we know from from Marvel history. So, but we do actually see other evolutions in a small way that we're going to probably see more of later. And one of those is with Yo-Yo, played by Natalie Cordova-Buckley. And she has a little bit more subtle turn than the other Inhuman on our team does. But she does have some things to deal with. And that is, of course, the fact that, number one, she was infected with the Shrike last season. So she doesn't get to go out on the field until she gets a clean bill of health. She does get that clean bill of health. But more importantly, Simmons has prepared for her some prosthetic arms that will replace her robotic ones and give her that sense of touch back again. And I like how that's done. Very subtly, it gives Yo-Yo some story to deal with, but at the same time, it's very an emotional turn that is not present elsewhere in the episode.
All right, and I think you could arguably say that she's faced more than virtually anybody. Yes, Coulson's died twice. Okay, that's kind of a big deal, I admit. But,
and he's had one of his arms cut off. She's had two.
Right, and she's got that brief moment where she tells Simmons that, no, these mechanical arms are part of my identity at this point. So I appreciate what you've done, but no. Of course, she comes to realize this is 1931. I can't go around with Terminator arms and not draw attention to myself. So she gives in, and it will be interesting to see how she adjusts to these new prosthetic arms. And my guess is she'll prefer them to the mechanical because it doesn't take any of her suffering away. It just gives her a new lease on life in a certain extent.
Right. And speaking of new leases on life, we have one last character to talk about who only appears at the very end, but boy, does Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. know how to pull out a post-credits epilogue.
Yeah, they do.
Every time. I shouldn't be surprised anymore at this point, but I am.
Right. And Ming-Na Wen has been certainly visible through social media, during the off season. So I think a lot of us expected to see more of her in this episode.
Right. But I appreciate that they didn't do that.
Yeah.
Because we were a little bit critical in season 6 of her death and resurrection, taking away some of the stakes that were at play. In some ways, the same way that Coulson's resurrection can do that as well. But here it is something that is not just glossed over. She doesn't just get into that coffin and recover immediately. Enoch has to take some extreme steps to repair the damage that's been done to her body. And we're not sure if she's going to come out of it in multiple episodes. So the fact that at the very end of this, we see that the recovery pod, or whatever you want to call it, is empty. It's very unexpected. Enoch certainly isn't expecting it. He just, in his robotic way, kind of says, oh, this is interesting. But May is clinging to the ceiling. Is she disoriented because of being on this new Zephyr that's been completely revamped? And I love how it's shown that way, where the set designers get to unveil a new set that has come a long way from that original bus plane that we saw in season 1. But also, she might be mistrustful of Enoch because obviously the Chronicoms are much more involved than we originally thought. And can we trust Enoch moving forward? I think we can, but he is the lone representative of his race that is not trying to take Earth as his home.
Right. And, to not make light of it, we just don't know what's going on in May's head. And she's reverting to what she knows, which is remove myself from the situation until I get a feel for the landscape that I find myself in. So we don't really know, for instance, does she know who she is?
Yeah, she might have some memory losses. She might have some, things where she has to catch up because she doesn't know anything about LMD Coulson. That's going to be a big deal. It's one thing to say, okay, I dealt with Sarge, because remember, she went through that in season 6.
Right.
Now we're dealing with someone who actually has memories of his relationship. And we saw him go through that when he had the fast forwarded 2 years. We heard about Tahiti. You could hear him talking. You could hear him delivering the vows at Fitz and Simmons' wedding. And part of it was, his last moments with May, which were off screen. We didn't get to see that. So May's going to have a lot to deal with moving forward, not just her recovery of her health, but Coulson's presence in a form as well.
Right. And I think right away we'll see who she recognizes and go from there, because if she immediately recognizes Simmons or Daisy or Deke, then we know, okay, there's still going to be some adjustment, but she'll work through it.
Right. And she's going to have to deal with the same kind of prejudices that that Mack and Daisy deal with. So, that'll be interesting to see where they place her in this new plot line and how soon she gets back into action, hopefully soon.
Yeah.
But everyone's got stuff that they're going to be working on. And I think it's great because we can only predict so much. We're only talking about the premiere here. We're not going to be doing this every week. So it's hard to predict where the show will go next.
Yeah, but I certainly like it. If I was giving it a grade, I'd certainly give it an A. I mean, I think season premieres are tough for any show, particularly when you have this many characters, this big a fan base, this big a universe in which you're an important part. There's a lot that could go wrong, and in this one, for me, everything went right.
Right. It's time to move past the snap, pre-snap, post-snap. We did that last season. And so we're doing our own thing here, and it's wrapping up nicely. My review for the premiere is up on Den of Geek's website. So obviously we've got nothing but good things to say about this episode, and I hope it keeps going. That's going to actually be it for this premiere discussion here on this video, but we do hope to do this in the future on Sci-Fi Fidelity, the podcast that Den of Geek had us host, which is no longer around. We talked about, overall seasons in general, usually with the first 3 episodes of a season, and we'd like to keep doing that. So if you enjoyed our analysis of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. season 7, the premiere, let us know in the comments below, because we'd like to keep doing this for other premieres and perhaps finales as well, in the same style that we did on Sci-Fi Fidelity.
Right. And, in the meantime, enjoy Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. during its return for season 7. New episodes air every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. on ABC, 10 p.m. Central Time. And
10 p.m., 9 p.m. Central, but yeah. Close enough.
Okay. But I want to thank you guys for joining us. And like Mike said, leave some comments, and hope to see you again soon.